Hi, and welcome to our podcast. I'm your host, Howard Drukarsh. I've been a successful realtor in Canada's largest market, Toronto, for over 30 years. And in the latter part of my career, I co-founded Canada's largest independent brokerage, Right at Home Realty, with a roster of 5,700 agents and growing. In 2020, I retired to start this podcast, and it's been a fascinating opportunity to meet highly successful and interesting guests, find out about their careers, and get their insight into our business. Today's guest is really a treat for me. For full disclosure, I've known Paul Johnston from almost the beginning of Right at Home Realty. The company was started by myself, my late partner, Arthur Bartram, and Ron Petticord. And in the early days, because we had no agents, Arthur and I together would recruit people. And Paul was one of the people that we had. So for me, it's fun to have someone who has a history with the company. And Paul, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me. If you've got 5,800 interviews to do, you've got a lot to do.
Yeah, right. Well, you're one of the few I'm doing, so don't worry about that.
I'm honored. Thank you.
So this is what's really fun is Paul started in this company that I co-founded when we were just basically an idea. We weren't successful in 2006. We kind of, I don't remember the numbers, but we were just growing. I think
I was agent 180 or 182.
Okay,
if I'm not mistaken.
Puts you in perspective. With 2004, by 6, we had 180, which isn't bad. I mean, I didn't realize we'd done that well. But, we've done a lot better with how many we have. But that aside, when I was active in the company, one of the roles I had was not retiring. I did that after. One of the roles I had was recruiting. So, it was fun for me to do that. And particularly seeing Paul again, because we saw each other over the years. I know Paul won't want me to announce how he's been an award winner from the get-go. We're going to talk about his career today. So for those that are interested in success, you might find a lot of what Paul's done interesting. So let me start with the question I always do, which is about entrepreneurs in your family. Paul, were there any entrepreneurs in your family?
Well, interesting question. There was. I mean, in large measure, kind of the most entrepreneurial of things. My paternal grandfather was a farmer who decided in sort of the quieter months to remain busy because he opened a small jewelry store in London, Ontario. Johnston Jewelers. Apparently it still exists. And so, yes, he was entrepreneurial. He was doing, the honest work of farming. And because that gave him sort of Christmas times and Valentine's times and whatnot off, he decided to open a small jewelry store, which I believe became rather successful. So he had dual careers, both of which were risky.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I asked the question is because I think people who have made a career of real estate understand entrepreneurial mindset versus people who come from a family that have, I guess, been in the corporate world. And what that means is you understand it's risky, but you like the challenge of the risk, or you wouldn't be in it. I mean,
Well, and you put your finger right on it. I think anyone who gets into at least residential sales and real estate needs to understand that what they're doing is entrepreneurial by nature. I mean, you're not going to be given anything. It's not a process. You're not in a chain. You either make it or you don't make it. So it is entrepreneurial, and it's not surprising, as you well know, that a lot of the people who get into real estate had careers in other places. What I found is either careers in other sales places, they came out of another sales background, or something creative where they were kind of fighting for their lunch. So it's not surprising that so many people as a second career end up in real estate because they latched onto something else they really loved and then made a transition into this.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect of most agents, although they may not realize it until they get, when you're in the licensing course, I don't think it's clear. But once you get licensed and come into the business, what you realize is, to your point, it's a competitive business. And a lot of the thrill part is the win. Is you're competing for a listing, you've got a client who's a buyer, you're competing to get the property for your client. In your case, you're working with builders, you're competing for land,
Sure.
You're competing for trades. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that people who have never been in a sales business don't recognize till they get in.
True.
On the other hand, I always say this: real estate it's about bricks and mortar, but it's really about people, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's what you do.
100% it is. It is a people business, and I think it's sometimes unfortunate that the people kind of get replaced with the product. You know, that we often talk in this business about listings and sides and product and units. It's people.
It is.
And when you lose track of that, I think it's very sad.
And obviously, you've done really well in your career, so I think you realize that getting into it, or maybe along the way, that the relationship, and just in the way you and I, organize this podcast today, so like just professional, on time, polite. Like, we know each other a long time, but I never really dealt with you through email so much, and it was really it was kind of interesting to see how well you operate your business. So,
thank you.
You're welcome. Gosh. You're welcome. Now, here's another question. These are the basics. So the second basic question I ask, because people are always interested, what did the guest do before real estate? So what did you do?
Right. So my real passion and the thing that I did was music and nightclubs and touring. That was kind of my thing for a long time. I started, believe it or not, at 14 doing high school dances with I had 2 cases of mixtapes, and I'd take them and play them. And then at 15, I managed to convince my dad to buy me some DJ gear, and I started DJing. And then that sort of progressed. I ended up doing all sorts of different things, from promoting live music events and DJed events here in Toronto. And then I eventually moved to Montreal. We started an operation in Montreal that did a lot of tours across Canada, a lot of concerts in Montreal and Quebec City and Vancouver and whatnot, and kind of grew that into a fairly sustainable business, as much as you could in that business. In the last 2 years, I'm thankful I'm no longer in that, because it's obviously been super volatile. But that's the world I came out of. And I actually, in looking back, I often think to myself that it was an amazing introduction to what I do now, because it was, as you pointed out earlier, I mean, entrepreneurial by nature, but also gave you a lot of the little bits of knowledge that you needed to survive, or I needed to learn to survive, by dealing with obstacles and dealing with lawyers and dealing with contracts and dealing with printing and dealing with all the little bits of production that are not entirely dissimilar in my world today from what I was doing, call it 20, 25 years ago. Only the hours are better, thankfully, than they were back then.
It's interesting because as you talk about the comparison, it's you're thinking, I also know a bit about the music business, although I never worked in it. But the one thing that
you're a player yourself, aren't you?
Well, I'm an amateur, amateur, and I love that. But being an amateur means no touring. So right,
good call.
But the one thing that is similar in dealing with clients is the range of personalities, to your point, of the people you would have dealt with in that industry. There isn't an industry that has more unique people, I think, in the world. So coming into real estate must have been quieter.
It was a little saner at times, right. And quieter, and a little, believe it or not, more regimented. But yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the joys of being in that business was that I interacted with a ton of different people, and such a wide range of backgrounds and personalities and outlooks and behaviors, from, perfectly kind of dry people to the most eccentric people you'd find. And that really taught you to listen. And I think it taught you how to hopefully address people in a way that was appropriate, and deal with situations and deal with personalities that at times were challenging.
Boy, it's as I said, we know each other from when I was right at home, but we don't know each other as well as we're getting. And I think anybody that's followed your career will find this podcast fascinating. So I'm going to keep going. So coming out of the music industry, what was it that got you interested in real estate?
Well, be utterly frank with you, it was I had kind of come to an end, and I had been managing some bands, and that kind of reached a logical conclusion for me, at least. And I was drifting around, not doing a great deal. And my mother, or late mother now, said to me, "You should get your real estate license." And I suppose, not unlike a lot of people and their parents, you kind of often went, "Oh, whatever." But in this instance, I thought, geez. That's interesting. That's good advice. That's good parental advice. And so I just sort of marched off and did my whatever courses it was back then. I don't think it took me more than 3 months to get the license. And because I recognized something, I recognized that for me, it was, again, a use of some entrepreneurial skills, or at least some go-getter self-started skills, but that the whole realm of real estate was something I had always really adored. And whether that was just sort of passively as a kid in Toronto, being fascinated by the, original Liberty Village, pre-development, pre-redevelopment, pre-reimagination of the space, to, the years I spent stomping around cities to try and find venues to rent, or nightclub space or rave spaces to hold events, that kind of that whole real estate thing was in my blood, although I never thought of it as necessarily a career. So it just was something that fit, and it fit really, really well. And to the extent that when I started digging into it, I was like, this is a very natural progression from something I already quite enjoy, but I owe it to my mother for having suggested it.
It's funny because a lot of the people we've had on here owe it to family members who made that suggestion.
Interesting.
We had Maya Vander from Selling Sunset, and I think it was her father said, "You're in sales. Why don't you go into real estate sales?" Like, parents have a good perspective, I guess, on what their kids can do. And
sometimes they do. And, that's interesting too. I met an agent. I had coffee with him maybe 2 years ago. A younger guy who I just was kind of interested in because he was doing very, very well. And I said to him, and by younger, I mean, he was probably 25. I said, "What did you do before real estate?" No, I went into real estate. I left university, went to real estate. I said, no one leaves university, goes into real estate. I mean, you did something else. No, that's what I wanted to do. Oh, well, why? Well, it's what I always wanted to do. And I thought to myself, two things. One, I haven't met many people who've said to me, I've always wanted to do real estate, unless they come from a family. That's part of the lineage. It's sort of a hand down or whatnot. But then I realized that there is a bit of a difference today, because kids are watching television about real estate. These shows like $1 Million Listings or Love It or List It or whatever, where this career of real estate is suddenly dramatized in such a way that it actually is the case that younger kids are growing up saying, that's what I want to do, which I don't think, is a reasonably new invention. And a strange one in some respects.
That's an interesting observation, because when I got into real estate in the 80s, and when I was I'd had another career in marketing, and I was like kind of one of the young people in the office in the 80s. And over the years I was recruiting, there were so many young people, and I just, listen, Paul, it's a good thing for me. I just figured they couldn't get jobs, and then this is the way their parents said, go get a license. But I think you're right. It's glamorized. I was watching Selling Sunset last night. The program just came on, and Netflix show, and it's glamorized to the nth degree, but it's not exactly the real business, but it's great show business, as you can imagine. So.
And that's a great distinction. I've been approached over the years about different TV things, and I've done some of them sort of piecemeal, but most of the bigger productions have been some sort of competition, agent versus agent, create a condition. Right. It is more dramatic in nature than it is necessarily about the business, which is fine, but TV's over here and, the business is over here. And so the sort of, the ER-ification, turning the business into something of television is new, but it's interesting. It's changing the people in the business, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's quite an interesting thing. I mean, I got into this when I retired. Thankfully, Adam approached me about doing this podcast. And when I retired, I did, I'd done all the real estate I'd wanted. I'd been a salesperson. I started a company. Like there was no place to go. And then I thought, this would be fun. And it's been remarkably interesting because I get to meet people like you, although I know you. I don't know you like I know you now. And all the other guests we've had have said they really enjoyed the chance to talk about themselves. Yes. Because in the business, your clients, they're not asking about Paul Johnston. They're saying, what can you do for me today? Right? That's really, and I joke with you all the time about the pressure of working at the level you work at. Also, just a small story here on Paul Johnston. So when I was recruiting, people who knew of you and knew of your success, young people coming in, would say to me, how did Paul become so successful? And my response was, ask Paul. It's not let's put it this way, it's not an easy route, but everybody sees the result. They don't see the grind to get there. So
sure.
And in your career, which has been exceptional and interesting, I'm going to throw in the buzzword, and you've worked with Unique Homes, which of course is the company name you use.
Sure.
How did you get into that aspect of marketing these very, very unique and interesting projects?
Well, thanks for noting that, and I'll tell you, it was from day one. It wasn't something I moved into. It was from day one. So roll back 15, 16 years when I got my license, and frankly, where the real estate business was in Toronto was sort of this first wave of giant condo development. So City Place was really a thing. All these rail lands were being converted into high-rise condominiums. And this was, part of the discussion was, okay, so how is the city of Toronto going to absorb this many condos? And do we need this many condos? And that was the conversation. And because that was kind of the prevailing tendency at the time, it caused me to stop and say, wait a minute, if I'm going to get into this business, I need to decide what it is I really want to do. I need to say, what are my strengths, if you will, and what are the things that really turn me on? And that has always been architecture and design. I've always been very interested in built form. I've been interested in spaces, urban spaces in particular, for a number of reasons. So I said, I'm going to focus on unique urban homes. My business is going to be unique urban homes. And so even before I had my license, I designed my little business card that said unique urban homes on it. And of course, at the time, it didn't necessarily mean anything because I hadn't done anything. But what it was a very confident, I think, statement that I was going to be interested in and specialize in homes that are distinctive by virtue of their architecture, their history, or their design. And that was what I set out to do, in large measure, kind of in opposition to being a guy who does a bit of everything. That wasn't particularly my interest. And it wasn't my interest either to be heavily involved in just sort of commodified real estate. And I use that word reservedly because I understand a good percentage of the business, especially new construction, is kind of based on that notion of real estate as commodity. But that wasn't something that particularly excited me. I know from years of working with and knowing really interesting people and unique people that they invariably had unique homes. They had great loft spaces. They had great old conversions. They had great homes that they'd redone. And I knew that in focusing on that type of real estate, that I'd be back in amongst those people with whom I sort of have a kinship, I think, and have a shared sort of belief and appreciation for unique architecture and design.
So it's interesting that people think that probably this was at the Unique Homes Park came as a result of all this career stuff, but it's part of what you wanted to do anyway, right in the beginning.
It was day one.
Yeah.
Like quite literally, it was day one. The card said Unique Urban Homes. I put together my own website that said Unique Urban Homes, and then I went out trying to figure out how to do that. But no, it was a starting point. That was not somewhere I ended up. It was a mission. When I got licensed.
And the homes are not necessarily single family. When you say unique urban homes, you work on multi-unit and incredibly interesting. I know I over the years I've seen where you recently or last year, you'll know better than me, where you sold the most expensive condo, I think, in the city or something.
Yeah.
The pool. Where was that? Where was that?
Yeah. Yeah, so yes, I mean, the neat thing for me is properties are unique, and that can range everything from really a great $500,000 resale condominium to, yes, we sold the most expensive condominium in the city, but has another interesting component to it. About 40% of my day-to-day business is still resale, still conventional resale, where someone calls and says, Paul, I have a home, I have a townhouse, I have a loft, I have a condo that I'm interested in selling, and it's unique because of this reason or that reason. This is a condominium that I know extremely well because it's in fact in a building that we sold. So that other 60% of my business is the new construction piece. So it's consulting and then doing marketing and sales for developers who are really committed to the notion of, design-driven, integral, smart, different projects. So that condominium happened to be located in a project that we had sold from new construction and then resold it on the resale market. And it's a development called Hill and Dale at Yonge and Roxborough that I'm immensely proud of because I think it really changed the paradigm in Toronto, and it demonstrated that tremendously good design architecturally from an interior perspective, from a space planning perspective, can command an exceptional price per square foot. In that instance, almost $3,000 a square foot.
Wow, what a story! I mean, really. Here's something that's more controversial, and I know that you recently commented on this, and this is about laneway houses in Toronto. And I think it was on social media you did make a comment. But you've been involved in that recently, correct? In laneway, so
involved with it for a long time.
Okay, so I think it's a great idea. I think it's using the urban space in a really good way. And actually, we had Suzanne Suzanne from. Okay, we both struck out on. Bella Wilkinson, Suzanne Wilkinson, who's one of the principals at a design company, and her husband,
yes.
Figure 3. She's at Figure 3. And her and her husband were building. I mean, these are people who know the business and they're design people. And I think that's probably, laneway houses aren't going to be little boxes. I think they're going to be really interesting design. Am I on the right track or not?
Well, I think so. I think you're right. I think that, we sold a laneway home 2 or 3 months ago that was precisely that. I mean, utterly unbelievable. It was big. It was about 5,500 square feet of space, and sold for $5 million. And I think one of the reasons why a property like that fetches so much is that the true laneway property, which is to say an independent freehold bit of land with a laneway property, is exceptionally rare. What the new laneway guidelines are really addressing for the most part is this notion of ancillary structures or secondary structures where you're building something on your property that can either serve as a rental property or can be additional living space for the primary residence. In the few instances where there are sort of laneway properties that exist as by virtue of the condition, being grandfathered, where it truly is a home on a laneway, there's a tremendous amount of interest in that. We sold our first one maybe a decade ago. That was a home that I had discovered just in my general travels walking around the city, and I was just amazed by it. So when the owner called me and said, "Geez, I'd like you to come and see it because I'd like to put it up for sale," that really touched me because this was something that I had seen so many times and really aspired to understand better. And I think those laneway conditions are becoming very popular. Whether they solve our housing crisis, to be announced. Whether they improve the kind of the conditions on the laneways, I think is clear. I think that's nothing but good. And I do hope we see a whole lot more of them.
I agree with you. I think I don't know the politics of all of this, but I think there's a market for it. And at the end of the day, it's the market that determines everything. So
very much, very much.
One of the things we've been talking about, because Adam and I started the podcast as the pandemic hit, is we've asked people, how has it affected the projects that you worked on then and now as we seem to be coming out of it now? What effect did it have on you and your team?
It's been huge. We launched our first sort of COVID project, a beautiful development in the junction called Junction Point during COVID, and had to figure out how to adapt to a world where we couldn't have a bunch of people standing in a showroom, and had to learn how to conduct ourselves on Zoom like most people did, but also how to become more transactional online. I always used to joke that, one day we'd put a little buy now button on the website. I literally joke because I thought, well, no one's buying real estate, in that sort of structure. But lo and behold, what we discovered as a result of COVID was that if you can communicate the qualities and the design and the attributes and the proposition of a new construction property adequately, enticingly, and well, that there are a certain number of people who are prepared to pull the trigger without that showroom experience. And so we ended up transacting dozens of properties in the absence of that very direct one-on-one communication, which I had always felt was sort of at the core of what we did. So we learned to adapt. And that has been a really interesting lesson. I must admit, it was much less interesting. It was much less fulfilling. It was much less engaging, but it was part of the business. I'm now happy that we're starting to launch projects again where we're actually able to open presentation centers and have people come in. We have a project upcoming in Leslieville called Biblio, where we've built a beautiful presentation center of being able to do some, restricted appointments, some limited appointments, and have people standing there having a conversation as opposed to staring into a screen. But now there's both capacities, so maybe that's good.
I think what it's done is opened up the world of potential buyers, not maybe sellers, but if someone's used to Zoom, they could be living in London, England, coming to
True.
Toronto, and they're comfortable making a decision that way, which would have never happened prior to the Zoom thing, right? So
Never.
For this industry, it's widened the possibilities. I'm going to move on to another topic, which always fascinated me because I do know your business somewhat, is the rental business. Now, I know you've done some high-end rentals, correct?
Yes.
People may not recognize what high-end means until you describe what that means. So, Paul, give us an example of what you define as a high-end rental.
Well, it's not a big portion of the business, but just by virtue of having had clients who have some great properties who for various reasons aren't using them. Yes, we've rented houses for $55,000 and $60,000 a month or $100,000 a day in some instances, just for very specific usages. And these are typically, again, people who are coming to Toronto typically for either a short period of time or are busily kind of building a new home or renovating a home, who need somewhere to stay for a while, but aren't really overjoyed with what the options are. So there are truly luxury rentals in the business. There aren't many, but there are a few, and we've had the privilege of leasing both some high-end single-family homes and some really unique condominiums as well, and lofts over the years. But the high-end in Toronto, the affluent market in Toronto for rentals is a pretty interesting spot.
And absolutely, that's why I brought it up, because I don't think most people realize high-end rental is not $5,000 a month anymore.
No, it's not anymore.
That's actually everything right now. Okay, so going back to the early days in 2006, when you started, how would you define how the market has changed from when you were? I mean, there's a zillion things we can talk about, but what are the things you think are the most important?
Well, I think it's one and the same, and let me try and be as concise about this as I can. Obviously, there's a lot more people in the business. You and I know that the growth of right at home is proof positive that the business of selling real estate has changed. But in lockstep, at the same time, what has changed is there has been a kind of a new almost industry emerge in Toronto, specifically in pre-construction and new construction, principally condominiums. So again, about 60% of the business that I do is new construction, pre-construction. However, that is really a very streamlined level of it and a very specific level of it that I often call real homes for real people. So we're designing and involved with projects that are really intended for upsizers and downsizers and people looking for homes, as opposed to the 90% of the pre-construction business, which is principally preoccupied with kind of the investment buyer, the guy who's buying 8 doors or 20 doors or 40 doors or whatever in pre-construction. That's probably, to me, the biggest change, is that now we have a marketplace in Toronto of predominantly or exclusively investor-driven development that has in its sort of realm the agents and the buyers and the sellers and the developers whose focus is purely that. Doesn't happen to be my expertise. It doesn't have to be the thing that I stare at every day. And I'm sure anyone who did an executive MBA would scold me and say, well, you ought to grow your business so that you were selling $1 billion of investment properties a year and representing towers and whatnot. That's not what I'm really passionate about. It's not particularly what I'm interested in, but it is a big and a compelling and a major part of the industry now in Toronto.
Mm-hmm. And the thing about this business, and that's why I asked, is again, I look at the early days when I was recruiting, and I would say to people, the business is going to change every 5 years. Now it changes every year in the max, right? I mean, you probably see it because you're in it every day, how things are moving so fast. Okay, now about your career. I know this may be hard, but it's a good question. What's been your biggest success in real estate?
Well, Um, I have the great privilege of having conversations with people, whether it's once a week or a couple times a month or whatnot, where someone will say to me, we really follow the work you do. We're here because we've really admired over the years the developments, the townhome projects, the mid-rise projects, the infill projects that you've represented and helped bring to market. And we really love what you do. That's a huge win. I mean, that to me is really something that warms my heart, I suppose, because it demonstrates that after 15 years of sort of pursuing this thing, which is let's focus on design-driven, really compelling architecture and great design intended for great kind of urban living, that people do identify that and say you have done something that is significant. So from the core, I suppose that's probably the most heartwarming thing. But the other sort of piece of that is that I now have a piece of legacy. And to me, that was always a really important thing. I've had the great privilege of working with like-minded developers and architects and designers and planners to create some projects across the city, a few dozen projects across the city now that exist and that are performing and providing great housing for people. And that I take great pleasure in driving by developments that we represented and sold, and look up and know that I had a role to play in those projects. That's something I take enormous pleasure in, and to me is very important. I mean, that's something I celebrate, because it does mean that long after I'm gone, most of those projects will still be serving the purpose of providing dynamic housing for people.
That's a really interesting way to look at it, and I can see why, because you have designed and worked with, your projects. The word unique, even if you hadn't chosen it, they're unique. Somebody would have told you, "Hey, Paul, those are unique," and they are, and they're design driven. It's
They are, Howard. And look, I think this is something, again, I've been really focused on it. I'm incredibly proud. I think in over 11 years, we've won Project of the Year for our developments 4 times at Build. And that to me is really flattering. It means that the industry too is saying, look, these finer grained, design driven, end user focused, progressive, intelligent developments are the sort of thing that the industry is now lauding and saying, look, this is something we should be celebrating. So to have, I don't know, 30 Build Awards or something, but specifically to have 4 projects of the year in that context is something I take quite seriously too, because it obviously means that what we're doing and the people we're doing it with, it's resonating and it's being applauded and it's being celebrated, which is great. I mean, Build is an industry thing. It's not particularly an outside facing thing, but it's nice to see the industry appreciating things that are more finer grained and more carefully constructed.
And for those that don't know what Build is, I've been a member of Build. It's the Building Industry and Land Development Institute Association. And to Paul's point, every developer is a member, small, big, people who have corollary businesses to development. It's an enormous organization, and they do a great job of promoting the industry. And they have, and I'm sure if you won the awards, you've been at their awards dinner. Their awards
Indeed.
Dinner is the most gigantic dinner I was ever at.
It's fun.
It's a lot of networking and all of that. So that's what Build is. Now here's another one. We only have a few more minutes. I know you're busy. So
please,
what's been your biggest challenge, and what did you learn from it?
Well, there's probably been 2. One is learning what to say no to. Recognizing that my business is intentionally kind of a niche business. Over the years, I've had to politely decline both, conventional listings for people who call me and say, hey, I think this is a home that fits your brand and your portfolio. And frankly, I don't believe it does. So I have to be gentle and respectful. And the other is looking at developments in some instances that are tremendous in terms of their size and the gross potential of them, but that for any number of reasons don't fit what we do, that just don't fit the moniker. I always want to make sure that we're value add to the clients that we take on. So where the context and where the pedigree and where the expertise in marketing and design and so forth is a value add. So we're approached fairly frequently by developers who say, look, you should look at this. This is perfect for you. And it's just not. So that's disappointment, because it's always challenging to say no to work. But I think it's probably one of the greatest disciplines of growing a business. And maybe the other more specific disappointment was we have had two projects get canceled over the years. We've had two projects that were sold that were not completed as a result of sort of market forces and planning problems and whatnot. One of which we resuscitated and resold, and everything worked out very well. But another one that was buried, and it was an incredibly challenging and very emotional and very difficult exercise to go through and tell people that this thing that they had bought, which is something they were dreaming of and thinking of holidays and Christmases and birthdays in, it wasn't going to happen. And that's profoundly disappointing and obviously a great financial loss to the business, but more to the point, kind of a great torturous loss to the people who had entrusted the developer to deliver something which wasn't going to happen. So that I think about that often, because it reminds me that there's people involved here, right? This is the business we're in.
And listen, I think it's a testament to you. I mean, some people would never acknowledge, particularly on a podcast, a failure. But what did you learn from it? You learned a lot, right? So that's always the upside of failure. It's the only way I've read this somewhere. You learn more from failure than successes, right?
I think it's very true.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's very, very true. We all endure them, and what you take away, sometimes you don't get much other than just sort of bruised ego. But if you're able to take something away, then great.
Yeah. Now, I know you've got lots on the go. You mentioned one, but what projects we're now in November of 2021. What projects do you have on the go?
We're wrapping up a lot. We just completed the last sale of a very, lovely project called Chaplin Townhomes in Midtown. We're at the tail end of some fabulous homes called Charbonnel, which are some 17 townhomes in Summerhill. We have just started the preliminary launch for a project called Biblio in Leslieville, which is an amazing 28-unit condo building, truly boutique condo building. And we have 3 or 4 projects sort of planned for the new year. But, I do find towards the end of the year, you're wrapping down, and we've been sort of selling the remainder of our projects. And a lot of them are under construction. 1181 Queen West, which is amazing, mid-rise building opposite the Gladstone Hotel, is rising up. Junction House and Junction Point, 2 projects we worked on in the Junction, are both under construction. So we're at this really lovely stage where a lot of projects are nearing the end of completion of construction or halfway there, and some new stuff for the new year, which I'm ultra excited about.
Well, that explains why you're busy. And I'm going to get to the end of this because I know you have an appointment shortly. So I know it'd be great to say you do this all on your own, but I know you have a team. And what sort of roles do the team members play in what you do?
Well, I've been very fortunate. I mean, I have always said that I want to keep this quite small because I'm not particularly interested in running a big team, despite some kind of neat offers to do so. And I really enjoy doing the business. I mean, Howard, it's actually true that I still do the business. I'm still negotiating agreements of purchase and sale and taking lawyers' letters and responding. This is something that really that I don't want to lose touch with. I have a very small team of 2 agents who work with me on a day-to-day basis. Then I have the support of office administrator and on-site administrators for our presentation centers, and then a select group of people who work with us in presentation centers just focused on new construction. So I'm able to do new construction as well as a fairly vibrant resale business, while also kind of maintaining and making sure that the rest of the business that's either new construction and resale continues smoothly. So it's small intentionally, and it's nimble. We're able to move quite quickly on projects and listings, and also because it's small, we're able to really focus on the things that we're particularly good at, which is unique urban homes.
All right. And the last question is, what would you say to someone who is interested in getting into the luxury end of the real estate business? Because that's what they look at. When they look at you, they see you in that. So how would you respond?
Well, luxury is a word, just to be super quick on that I'm always anxious about. I mean, taking, for example, Hill and Dale as a project where I mentioned this condominium that we sold not long ago to astronomical price. I think it's very easy to say luxury this, luxury that, but it doesn't mean anything. What you need to understand, especially from a new development perspective, where we're often brought in, is what are the things that make something luxurious? What are the things that actually lead you to feel that this is something worth spending on? And this has to do with a caliber of space, caliber of design, a caliber of architecture that leads people who have a palate, a decent palate, an educated eye to say that's something that I'm going to admire. That's often, for our business, things of a very limited scale. We sell developments up to about 120, 140 million, and that's where we stop, because I like the smaller scale infill development work. I think what you need to do if you say, hey, I want to get in the luxury market, is understand what that means to you. Understand what it is to be involved with both the people in that milieu, but also the type of homes that you're going to find. Because luxury on its own doesn't mean anything. What matters to me and what matters to my business is finding properties and the people who own them who have a real taste, a real level of sophistication of design, who admire, appreciate, and reward great architecture and design, and are looking to sell their property or development on the basis of merit, on the basis of something being fundamentally good. If it ends up being very affluent, so be it. If some people call it luxurious, so be it. But at the end of the day, is it a unique urban home? Does it fit this notion of being distinctive by virtue of architecture, history, and design? That's what interests me.
A great answer, because it really did define luxury in a way that people don't think of it. So good. So, Paul, I've kept you longer than I said I would.
I've enjoyed it.
My fault. But let's use the language of your last career, and that's a wrap. Okay.
That is indeed. Hey, that was great fun, and I really appreciate your time and your interest.
Well, it's great, and all the best in the future. Happy holidays, and maybe we'll get you back again if you have some time. All right?
I enjoyed it. Take good care.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Thank you.